I always thought betrayal was something that happened to other families. You know, the kind you read about in tabloids or hear whispered at church. Not mine, not my father, the respected businessman, not my aunt, the woman who practically helped raise me. But I was wrong, so unbelievably wrong. One moment we were the picture-perfect family. Sunday barbecues, Christmas traditions, laughter filling the house. And then, with a single text message, everything shattered. My mother's world collapsed. My father didn't just betray her, he destroyed her. And as I watched him and Raquel build their new life pretending nothing happened, I made a decision. They thought they won. They thought they could rewrite history, but they forgot one thing: I was watching, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you my family was the kind people envied. Stable, loving, picture-perfect. My father, Richard, was a respected businessman, the kind of man who shook hands with politicians and had his name on expensive plaques. My mother, Sarah, was the heart of our home, always making sure everything was just right. And then there was Raquel, my mom's younger sister, the fun aunt, who brought excitement into our lives. She was the one who took me to my first concert, the one who made my mom laugh even when she didn't want to. It's almost laughable now, how blind I was to what was right in front of me. There was always a certain energy between my father and Raquel, an unspoken connection that I brushed off as harmless. He teased her more than he did anyone else. She laughed at his jokes a little too hard. But in a family that looked so perfect from the outside, I never questioned it. Why would I? My mother adored Raquel, trusted her like a sister should. And Richard? He was the kind of man who always preached loyalty and family values. The irony of it all still burns in the back of my throat. Looking back, the signs were there, tiny cracks in the picture-perfect frame. The stolen glances, the whispered conversations that ended the moment someone walked into the room. I remember one Christmas, Raquel gave my dad a gift that felt too personal. A leather wallet, monogrammed with his initials in gold. My mom thought it was sweet. I felt something else, something I couldn't quite name at the time, but I pushed it aside. Because that's what we do when we don't want to see the truth. We ignore the warning signs and convince ourselves that everything is exactly as it should be. And then came the barbecue. The day that changed everything. The day our perfect little family shattered into something unrecognizable. But the worst part? The betrayal didn't just come from my father. It came from someone we all trusted. Someone who was supposed to protect us, not tear us apart. It happened so fast. One second we were enjoying burgers and laughter, the next, the entire world stopped. My cousin, Lucas, grabbed the wrong phone, Raquel's phone. He was just trying to change the music, nothing more. But his face went pale, his fingers frozen over the screen. I remember the way his eyes darted between Raquel and my dad, confusion twisting into something uglier. Then he spoke. Just 2 words, "What's this?" And suddenly nothing was the same. Silence fell over the backyard like a heavy fog. My mom, mid-laugh, turned to Lucas, puzzled. Raquel lunged for the phone, but it was too late. Someone else grabbed it. My uncle, maybe? Everything blurred after that. Someone read the messages out loud. Explicit. Undeniable. My father's name alongside words and photos that didn't belong in a family gathering. Gasps, chairs scraping against the patio, my mother's wine glass shattering against the ground, and then her face. I don't think I'll ever forget it. The way her breath hitched, the way she reached for something, someone, but found nothing. Raquel tried to speak first. It's not what it looks like. The oldest lie in the book. My father, ever the businessman, went into damage control. We should talk about this privately. But there was no privately anymore. The truth was out and the damage was done. My mother's hands trembled at her sides, her lips parted as if searching for words that wouldn't come. And then she walked away. Just walked away. No screaming, no accusations. Somehow that was worse. The party ended in chaos. Guests whispered, Some left in a hurry. Others stayed to gawk at the wreckage of our family. My dad tried to follow my mom inside, but she slammed the door in his face. Raquel. She stood there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Not ashamed, not sorry, just waiting. For what? I didn't know. But I could feel it in my gut. This was only the beginning. My mother stopped existing that night. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. She moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. It was as if all the life had drained from her the moment she saw those messages. I tried to reach her, to bring her back. But how do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. The woman who once hummed while making breakfast, who filled our home with warmth, was gone. In her place was silence. Days turned into weeks. The blinds stayed shut, the phone went unanswered. People whispered about her, about us. Some kind souls from church brought food, but it just piled up in the fridge. She barely touched a bite. I started noticing the unopened pill bottles stacking up on the counter. She was supposed to take them, antidepressants, something for her blood pressure, but she didn't. Every time I brought it up, she just waved me away, eyes hollow, staring at nothing. And then one night, I found her on the bathroom floor, burning up with fever, too weak to stand. The doctor said it was an infection, something that could have been treated if she had taken care of herself. But she hadn't. She wouldn't. They admitted her, pumped her full of antibiotics, but it wasn't just her body that was sick. The real illness was deeper, buried in the cracks my father had left behind. She barely reacted when I visited. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, lost in a place I couldn't reach. And then, after a month of trying to convince the world she was fine, they moved her to a psychiatric facility. That word felt like a punch to the gut. Psychiatric. As if my mother was broken beyond repair. I wish I could say that moment woke me up, that I suddenly knew what to do. But I didn't. I just stood there in that cold hospital hallway, fists clenched, watching my father and Raquel pretend to care. Their words felt rehearsed, their concern a performance. And yet, they didn't. Leave. They lingered, watching me, waiting for what? I didn't know yet, but I had the sinking feeling they weren't done ruining lives. While my mother lay in a hospital bed, barely holding on, my father and Raquel were out there thriving. I wish I was exaggerating, but no. Within weeks, they had moved in together. Not into some quiet, hidden place either. They bought a massive house in a gated community, complete with a pool, luxury cars, and a front row seat to their new happily ever after. And just to twist the knife deeper, they weren't shy about it. Their social media was flooded with pictures, romantic dinners, vacations, their perfect new life. I knew they wanted me to see it. I knew they wanted everyone to see it. But the worst part? It wasn't just the flaunting, it was the rewriting of history. Suddenly, my father wasn't the man who betrayed his wife of 30 years. He was the victim. They spun a new narrative, one where my mother was cold and distant, where their affair was inevitable. Friends, colleagues, even family members who should have known better started to believe them. My father was a businessman after all. He knew how to sell a story. And Raquel? She played the role of the misunderstood soulmate so well, you'd think she deserved an Oscar. I kept my distance, but distance didn't mean escape. They made sure of that. Every family gathering became a battleground, every phone call another attempt to make me understand. People fall out of love. It happens. Your mother wasn't happy anyway. You need to stop holding on to the past. It was infuriating. They didn't just expect me to accept their betrayal, they wanted me to celebrate it. To pretend none of it mattered, as if my mother's breakdown was just an unfortunate inconvenience in their love story. And maybe I could have ignored them forever, cut them out completely, let them drown in their own delusions. But then Raquel made her big announcement. And suddenly, avoiding them wasn't an option anymore. I should have known it was coming. People like them don't just settle for taking what they want. They need to win. And nothing screams victory like a big public pregnancy announcement. Twins. Raquel was glowing, my father beaming like some proud first-time dad, as if he didn't already have a family he abandoned. The news spread fast, and with it came a new wave of pressure. Suddenly, everyone expected me to step up. Not as a son betrayed, not as someone still reeling from the destruction they caused, but as a big brother. The manipulation started subtly. Soft comments from relatives. Blood is blood. The babies didn't do anything wrong. Then it escalated. My father started showing up uninvited, talking about fresh starts and second chances. Raquel played her role perfectly, teary-eyed, hand on her stomach, whispering about how she wanted the twins to have family, as if my mother, still locked away in that psychiatric facility, wasn't family. As if the pain they caused was something I could just forgive and forget. Then came the church. Raquel, ever the strategist, knew exactly where to push. She spun her version of the story, twisting the narrative until suddenly I was the villain, the bitter son refusing to accept God's plan. Pastors called me, old family friends reached out. Holding on to hate will only hurt you. Your father loves you. Those babies need their big brother. It was relentless. Every conversation was a test, every interaction a trap. And the worst part? Some people actually bought it. Some expected me to give in. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not after everything they did. Not while my mother was still suffering. But standing my ground came with a cost. And they weren't done trying to break me yet. Ignoring them wasn't enough. They needed me to comply. To smile in family photos, to hold the twins when they arrived, to stand next to my father as if he hadn't destroyed everything. And when I refused, they changed tactics. The phone calls became more frequent. Raquel crying, saying the stress was too much for her pregnancy. My father's voice full of forced patience telling me I was better than this. When I stopped answering, they started showing up, first at my apartment, then at my workplace. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an ambush. They played every card. Your mother wouldn't want this. The babies deserve a family. This anger is poisoning you. I heard it all over and over until I started questioning myself. Was I being too harsh? Should I at least try for the sake of the twins? But then I'd remember my mother, lying in that hospital bed, the life drained out of her. And I knew this wasn't about family. It was about control. They needed me to validate their choices, to erase the guilt they refused to carry. When I still didn't cave, they escalated. Raquel, ever. The manipulator started talking to the church leaders again, painting me as a lost soul who had turned away from his family. The whispers started. People I grew up with looked at me differently. Old friends hesitated before speaking to me. And when even that didn't work, my father made one final move. He threatened to cut me off financially, as if money could make me forget the years of lies and betrayal, as if anything could. I was done playing their game. I had spent too long trying to make sense of their actions, trying to justify why they would hurt the people who loved them most. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't powerless. And they were about to find that out the hard way. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted distance, wanted to move on without their poison infecting my life. But fate had other plans. It started with a casual conversation, a passing remark from an old family friend. Your dad's company is doing really well, huh? Must be nice with all that government money rolling in. Government money? That didn't make sense. My father built his empire on private contracts, not government funding. Something felt off. And once that seed of doubt was planted, I couldn't let it go. Curiosity turned into obsession. I started digging, searching through old financial records, emails, anything I could get my hands on. And that's when I found it. The cracks beneath the polished surface. Payments that didn't add up. Employees who didn't exist on paper. Fake invoices, offshore accounts, entire ledgers full of numbers that screamed fraud. It was more than a mistake. It was a full-scale operation. My father wasn't just cutting corners, he was stealing. And worse, Some of that stolen money had gone straight into financing his new life with Raquel. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, the man who preached about hard work and integrity, was a liar in more ways than one. And Raquel? She wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a willing accomplice. The house, the cars, the extravagant baby showers, it was all funded with dirty money. And the more I uncovered, the worse it got. My father wasn't just evading taxes, he was knee-deep in fraudulent government contracts. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I could have walked away, pretended I never saw anything, but after everything they had done, after the hell they put my mother through, how could I? They thought they were untouchable, that their lies would never catch up to them. But they forgot one thing. I was still watching, and for the first time in a long time, I finally knew exactly what to do. I wasn't impulsive about it. This wasn't about anger or payback. It was about justice. I spent weeks gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Bank statements, falsified contracts, emails that clearly showed my father and Raquel's involvement in the scheme. I made sure nothing could be traced back to me. I wasn't going to let them wiggle out of this one. No charming smiles, no half-baked excuses. This time they'd face the truth whether they liked it or not. I filed everything neatly, organizing it into a report that told the whole story. Fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, the works. Then, I sent it anonymously to the IRS. It felt surreal, like I was setting off a bomb and waiting for the fallout. Part of me wondered if they'd even notice. My father had always been good at hiding things after all, but deep down I knew this wasn't something even he could cover up. The evidence was airtight. It was only a matter of time. After that, all I could do was wait. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, wondering if it was the call that would blow everything wide open. I kept my distance from my father and Raquel, but they didn't seem to notice. They were too busy living their fantasy, oblivious to the storm heading their way, and that gave me a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't their pawn anymore. I was the one pulling the strings. Then one morning it happened. News broke that federal agents had raided my father's office. They seized computers, files, everything. I watched the coverage in stunned silence, barely breathing as I saw images of familiar faces. Employees being escorted out, my father looking pale and furious. It was happening, and it was far from over. Panic spread fast. The moment the federal agents stormed my father's office, the empire he built started crumbling. News outlets ran the story nonstop. Prominent businessman under federal investigation for fraud. His name was everywhere, but for all the wrong reasons. I could only imagine the look on his face when he realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was real. And it wasn't going away. Then came the betrayals. His employees, the ones he had always treated like disposable pawns, saw the writing on the wall. One of them flipped almost immediately, trading testimony for a lighter sentence. With that, everything unraveled even faster. The fraud wasn't just big, it was massive. Millions of dollars in fake invoices, tax evasion schemes, government. Money funneled into his personal accounts. The evidence was airtight and my father knew it. So he did what cowards do best. He ran. Raquel was right there with him, of course. They packed their bags, grabbed whatever cash they could, and headed for the airport. Maybe they thought Mexico would be their fresh start. Maybe they actually believed they could outrun the law. But the FBI was already waiting. I wish I could have seen their faces when the agents surrounded them at the gate, when the handcuffs clicked around their wrists. My father, the man who thought he was untouchable, taken down like a common criminal. And Raquel? Well, turns out, playing the role of devoted wife doesn't do much when you're knee-deep in federal crimes. The media had a field day. Footage of them being escorted out in cuffs played on repeat. The internet was brutal. People who once praised my father now mocked him. And the best part, the same family members who once begged me to forgive and forget suddenly had nothing to say. The illusion had shattered. Richard and Raquel weren't victims. They were criminals. And soon they'd finally face the consequences. Justice didn't come overnight, but when it did, it was absolute. My father, the man who once stood at the top, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. 5 years of trading his tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit. 5 years of watching everything he built get stripped away. His company, gone. His wealth, seized. The luxury life he and Raquel had flaunted, reduced to nothing. And Raquel, she didn't walk away clean either. She faced her own set of charges: complicity, financial misconduct, and fraud. Turns out playing house with a criminal makes you one too. The fallout was brutal. The house, the cars, the lavish gifts, all repossessed. The people who once praised them, who defended them, vanished overnight. No more dinner parties, no more glamorous vacations. They weren't admired anymore. They were a cautionary tale. And the twins? They didn't stay with Raquel. The courts granted custody to her ex-husband, a man who had his own reasons to despise her. Those babies would grow up far from the toxic mess she and my father created. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. There was no celebration, no grand moment of triumph, just a quiet sense of closure. The damage they caused couldn't be undone, but at least finally, they couldn't hurt anyone else. And my mother? She was healing. Slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. The day she finally stepped outside, letting the sun touch her face, for the first time in months I knew we had turned a corner. She wasn't the same woman she once was. None of us were. But we had survived. People always say karma comes for those who deserve it. I used to think that was just wishful thinking. But watching my father's empire crumble, seeing Raquel go, from smug to shattered, I realized something. Karma isn't just some mystical force. Sometimes karma is a person who refuses to stay silent.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.